It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Craig Kapitas is contributing editor to The Daily Beast. Busy week?
You think so, yeah.
All right. Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine, is with us as well. How are things with you?
Very good. Busy.
Busy. You had to think about that.
Yeah.
All right. Lila Jacinto, senior editor at France24.com. How have been things this week?
Oh, it's the weekend. That's all I'm thinking.
Is it the weekend across the channel? Patrick Smith is in London, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report. How are things?
As you know, these lazy Anglo-Saxons start their weekend sort of sometimes on Wednesday afternoon, so we're well into it. And actually, the weather is surprisingly sunny.
Okay, that's news. By the way, you can watch The World This Week or listen, like, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. Last week at this time, Craig was present. We were listening to Belarus's president, Alexander Lukashenko, boasting how it's thanks to him that the Wagner mercenaries halted their march on Moscow and that he convinced Vladimir Putin not to whack Yevgeny Prigozhin. Well, now, the same Lukashenko says he's upped and gone from Belarus.
As for Yevgeny Prigozhin, he's in St. Petersburg. Where is he this morning? He might travel to Moscow or he might be elsewhere, but he's not on Belarus's territory.
That clip from Thursday, Craig, Russia watchers have been monitoring airplanes going back and forth and this sort of thing. Do we even have any? Because all we've heard from Yevgeny Prigozhin are 2 audio clips over Telegram since
That's right. My information is he's desperately searching for a cure to Novichok poisoning, or perhaps post-nasal drip. No one has a clue where he is right now, and that's the reality of the situation.
Was he ever confirmed to be in Belarus?
It appears that he was there. What's also taking place here is Putin is doing what all Russian leaders have done since the time of Ivan the Terrible. They're stringing along their enemies. And I think it's a safe bet that it's, in fact, I would bet that at some point Prigozhin, will be killed. And it takes time. We live in this age where we want everything to happen fast, right? What's going on? The Russians take their time with it. Remember, I don't remember Trotsky. I mean, I covered him back at the Revolution, but it took. Patrick was there with me, and I don't deny it. But the point was when Stalin went after Trotsky, it took 5 or 6 years to get him. And the same thing. So
right.
These serious enemies, it takes time. They want to keep them around for one reason or another, and we don't know the reasons.
All right. If Yevgeny Prigozhin is in Russia, then surely he's watched a bit of state television there. Suddenly, it's wall-to-wall coverage of spectacular raids on his businesses and his St. Petersburg home. Quite palatial, by the way, as you can see from these images. Russia 1 displaying the wigs discovered alongside the cash passports and gold bars, with shows like 60 Minutes there, scrutinizing the vast wealth accumulated by Prigozhin and his offsprings, Vivian Walt.
You've got to hand it to Russia TV. They really do put on a good show. And this might have been just a good show. What a shock. He has... treasures and a mansion and, as if they didn't know these things. So, yes, I think it is pretty much a show. And I think it's what Craig says, that it's useful for Putin right now to be stringing people, to be stringing the saga out, if you like, as to where he is and what his plans are.
Patrick Smith, in the immediate aftermath of June 24th in that aborted march, the silence was deafening in a lot of African capitals. People didn't know, which foot to dance on, as we say in French, when it comes to whether Prigozhin was still an interlocutor, whether the Wagner Group was still there. Are they speaking up, or are they just staying out of it still?
I think they're pretty much staying out of it. But what has been made absolutely clear, both by the relevant governments, that would be Centrafrique and Mali, Burkina, to a lesser extent, that the deal between their capitals, their juntas, is with Moscow. It's not with an individual, whether it's Yevgeny Prigozhin or not. So, and Lavrov, who wants to host this big Africa summit later this month in St. Petersburg, has made that clear too. So I think the deals between Moscow and the African regimes that it was dealing with via Wagner, that's going to remain in place. Just a hint in the search for Prigozhin, maybe we should be looking in some of the bars in the banlieue of Bamako or Bangui, and maybe he'll turn up there. I think he might find that a more congenial environment than Moscow or St. Petersburg at the moment.
Because what are they saying on the media outlets that are so pro-Russian there?
In the pro-Russian media outlets in Africa?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the line they're parroting. They're saying this, the official line is, this is a big distraction. The main deal is the relationship between the junta in Bamako and the junta and the government in Moscow. That's the one to concentrate. They've been pretty quiet about Yevgeny the individual. So I think that we're going to carry on. They want to keep alive the idea that the Wagner Russian deployments in Mali are actually working to defeat the jihadists, which they're patently not, as we've discussed many times. They're an absolute failure. In Centrafrique is slightly different, that the Wagner mercenaries in Centrafrique have actually pushed back the rebellion in Centrafrique, so they've got a better track record there. But even then, the official media in Centrafrique is not weeping for the disappearance of Prigozhin.
Leo Jacinto, what to make of this spectacle?
Well, it seems to be there seems to be two schools of what this is all about. Is one school is Putin going to win this? As Craig was saying, it will carry on. Russia is a bizarre place, and the Russian people are just cynical about their leadership. They've always been, and Putin will win the day. But on the other hand, there are people who are saying, no, this shows the state in a very weak, crumbling state. Among other things, 15 Russian soldiers died in this failed mutiny, and there has been nothing about any sort of justice, any legal process. I'm sure questions are being asked. Also, the FSB, for instance. There was a mutiny, and the FSB did not, it didn't work. It's supposed to, be ahead of terror attacks and upcoming mutinies. And so, there are two schools. And maybe the reality is somewhere in the middle, where the Russian state will crumble on weak, and Putin will hold the day.
Craig Kapitas, the criticism's been voiced even on Russian state television, the kind Leela's just described.
Well, sure, and criticism of what's actually happening in Russia historically has happened, and it's always authorized by the leader, in this case Putin. The reasons why, call your local Kremlinologist. But this is something that every Russian leader has done. In fact, at one point, Stalin started a magazine to put out articles that were against the regime because he wanted to have something
credible.
Credible. And there was a guy I knew in Russia. He used to work for Stalin. He was a translator, and he said, most interesting thing. He said, a Russian leader's greatest fear is that he wakes up one morning and he doesn't have any more enemies to destroy. You talk about cynical. It doesn't
That's
get worse.
indeed
More
cynical.
cynical than
While we're playing Where's Prigozhin, there's the grim reality of war. Over in Ukraine, a punch to the gut for friends and family of Victoria Amelina. Her Tuesday funeral in the capital Kyiv, a who's who of intellectuals and activists. The 37-year-old writer and poetess succumbing to injuries sustained in last week's Russian missile strike on a restaurant in the frontline city of Kramatorsk. Amelina had gone from fiction to documenting war crimes by the invader.
The loss of any writer in this war, but especially losing Victoria, is not only losing her potential writings or her as a personal friend and family member. It means losing a whole layer of what could have been and is never coming into existence.
Vivian Walt, there's a sense of fatigue growing, and
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here, obviously we have the funeral of one, beloved writer, but it was, in a sense, a reminder of how much this country has lost. I mean, even if Ukraine is headed to victory, which looks unlikely anytime soon, what has been lost already is just kind of unfathomable. The amount of people, we're not quite sure how many have been killed on either side. And in Ukraine, the amount of property damage, the amount of displacement. And so, interestingly, that she was a chronicler of war crimes, which is something that, we're now grappling with, but which is going to take years, obviously, to be made accountable for. I think that, in a way, the second year of war is really a different thing. It's all these major issues coming into play now.
Yeah, I mean, and this ties, we were wondering about where is Yevgeny, but, this ties with when we are talking about what happens to all these fighters. It's the war in Ukraine, and Russia wants Wagner fighters in. But the counteroffensive is going dispiritingly slowly. Zelensky had... he said that today. I mean, they keep saying that, they are not losing territory. But there's no doubt that, the Russian defenses have dug in deep. And, the counteroffensive is carrying on without any air power. I've never come across a military operation that you're conducting without air power. It's hobbled. What are we discussing?
Bingo. You win the
Thank
bingo.
you.
You do. Because what Vivian's described accurately as, you said, unfathomable losses, okay? Those unfathomable losses will continue until NATO provides air cover. Full stop. Next question, please, Francois. That is the so-called proverbial bottom line.
Patrick Smith, this Friday, in lieu of air cover, which we're not expecting at next week's NATO summit, it's cluster munitions that Washington's promising. Your thoughts?
Well, I have to say, what I've seen of these munitions across several wars in Africa at close range, they are devastating. The ethical rationale here is, we're giving, Russia is using cluster munitions against the Ukrainians, so, and they're invading, so the Ukrainians are defending their territory, they've got a right to use whatever they can. But I would go along with what Craig is saying. If you're talking about trying to give this counteroffensive the necessary power to really have some effect against Russia's seasoned defenses, you're going to need air power. There's no question about it. So I find the argument over cluster munitions, A, I'm against them, I guess, on moral stand, and B, it's a kind of diversion from the main thing, which is to give the Ukrainian military the air attack capability it needs to prosecute the war. Otherwise, it's just not going to make the headway it wants to make. And we're going to be having this conversation in a year's time.
Can I say just one thing? When it comes to covering wars, the wars I've covered, the one thing that had to be said for U.S. operations was the precision munitions. In places like Afghanistan, where they're used to war, it's the humanity of good weapons. And now we are giving the kind of weapons with which we criticize what Moscow was doing in Syria. We need good weapons. That's what we offer as the West.
War is a good business, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Let's turn our attention to how we're going to be getting our news maybe in the future. First, it was Elon Musk's erratic decisions throwing Twitter users off guard. Now comes the competition. Instagram's new microblogging app, Threads, downloaded more than 30 million times in its first 16 hours, smashing the record of ChatGPT. Mark Zuckerberg's Meta brings the might of the parent company that already owns not just Instagram, but also Facebook and WhatsApp. Twitter's founder, Jack Dorsey's not a fan. The man now struggling to get Blue Sky off the ground quipped, "We wanted flying cars. Instead, we got 7 Twitter clones." But Vivian Walt, the fact is that this is quite a rollout.
I was one of them. I mean, I think I was in the first.
How did you get
10
one? Because we
million.
don't have them here in Europe yet. They're not in the EU.
Really?
We're using a
Too sure.
VPN?
I went on my app store and downloaded mine.
Oh my God.
It feels very much like Twitter. I have to confess, I've never been a big Instagram fan. I don't like the kind of photo, thing that you have to put on every post. And I think that this has the potential to be big. I mean, Instagram and WhatsApp have global audiences much more than Twitter does. We think of Twitter as being the biggest messaging app, but that's the case in the English-speaking world. It's not the case in a lot of the rest of the world. It's so much like Twitter. I found myself on the way here actually looking through Threads and not knowing if I was looking at Twitter or Threads. I had to stop a moment.
Well, someone who agrees with you is called Elon Musk. He's accusing Mark Zuckerberg of stealing his model and his secrets. His lawyers point to staff who've migrated from Twitter to Meta since Musk took over and purged. Quote, Twitter intends to strictly enforce its intellectual property rights and demands that Meta take immediate steps to stop using Twitter's trade secrets or other highly confidential information. Like everything else regarding social media, it's all happening in the United States and it all ends up in court, Craig Kapitas.
Social media is survival of the vulgarist. And Musk and Zuckerberg are fighting for the title.
So you don't believe it when Mark Zuckerberg says he's going to have a kinder social media?
No, I think they're fighting for the title of origin of feces in this kind of Darwinian thing. I mean, how many more social media sites do you need, Lee? I ask you, you're a social media editor. You once showed me how to use...
I'm not a social media
Well, no, but
editor.
you know this stuff.
Putting me down.
No, but you know this stuff. I don't. I'm an inky guy.
Your Facebook grandpa.
So I defer to you because you know the internet much better than I do and how this stuff works. And my question is, how much more of this stuff can we take?
Look, how much more of this stuff can we take? I think it's not quite our generation that is this market. But I mean, the more players there are, the better, always. A domination of a market is never good. And Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter.
But we want two things, right? We want, on the one hand, for there to not be a cartel, not to have Mark Zuckerberg controlling all of social media. But on the other hand, we want to go somewhere where it's a common space, where you have differing views.
And different platforms offering the same thing.
And what do you get when you arrive there? The sound of furniture being thrown downstairs. I'm increasingly seeing less value in all of this social media with a lot of the noise. As far as this thing Thread, when is Francois Macron going to get a Thread account? When are global leaders going to get Thread accounts?
Well, they already have them,
Are they
actually.
using them? Are we quoting
what I
them
saw
tonight?
on
It's
my
only day 2.
Threads feed was, the news and videos that I wanted to see. And I kind of disagree with you. I have been very dependent on Twitter for quite a long time for breaking news. Something breaks, you go on Twitter immediately and see who's saying what, whether it's world leader or activists or opposition leaders or whatever. It's a fantastic way to contact people you need to interview.
So, Patrick Smith, you don't need a VPN to download it, since the U.S. and the U.K. are countries where it rolled out first. This new microblogging site. Yep. Your thoughts on the fact that they're waiting before they try to go into the EU market?
why are they doing that? Well, I guess like everything else, it's sort of test marketed in Britain, because Britain is we have this obsession with technology. We may not be very good at it, but we're obsessed with other people's technology and trying it out. Perhaps the Europeans are waiting for the outcome of the cage fight. I thought it was going to be in Italy. I'm not certain, but I think maybe let's forget about the legal contest and let Musk and Zuckerberg get on with the cage fight. And whoever wins the cage fight, they inherit Twitter and all the intellectual property rights to Twitter. That seems to be a perfectly fair resolution of the crisis.
Let's turn our attention to the African continent while we await that cage match that Patrick is eager for. It's the old strongman leader's playbook. Introduce term limits to seem like a Democrat, but then claim that the constitutional reform reset the clock at zero and run again. That's the context in which all of Senegal held its breath earlier this week and waited for the outgoing Macky Sall to state his intentions.
My dear compatriots, my decision, long and carefully considered, is not to be a candidate in the next election on February 25th, 2024, even though the Constitution gives me the right to do so.
Et cela, même si la Constitution m'en donne le droit.
Even if the Constitution gives me the right. Vivian Walt.
Bit of a convoluted argument. I'm eager to hear what Patrick has to say about this. But yes, I mean, he could have argued that because there was a new constitution, he could now run for a third term.
Because that's what Ivory Coast's president did.
Correct. Didn't work out that.
Well, it's
an old playbook now.
You know, and my immediate thought was, was there some, former colonial power maybe that told him, that this was not going to fly? But I think more realistically, possibly, he just figured maybe he wouldn't win. And, Senegal has a 2-round system like France, and there was a chance that the opposition would simply band against him and throw out the bums, as we like to say in English.
Patrick Smith, there was genuine suspense before that speech by Macky Sall. Do you agree with Vivian that he just decided, well, I'm not going to win, or did he want to take the high road and enter the history books?
I wish it was the latter. I have to say, I guessed it completely wrong. I was doing interviews on Monday afternoon. I said, look, I think, he's now going to say he's going for the third term and to hell with it. I was actually told by one of the officials in Paris about a year ago that Macky Sall had already told Emmanuel Macron that's what he was going to go do. He was going to go for a third term, and he hoped that France wouldn't try to intervene in it. So I think a lot of people expected him to go that way. But he's got a very uneven adherence to the principles of democracy. He did come in and, 12 years ago, saying he's going to end the septennat, the 7-year term, and he's going to go for the 5-year term. But that didn't stop him serving out the full 7 years before he changed the constitution and then went for another 5-year term and then a 5-year term after that. So, or was thinking of a 5-year term after that. So it's a bit of a speckled history of constitutional adherence. I think the one thing missing from his long interview with Le Monde published this morning was any recognition of the lives that have been lost while he procrastinated about his political future. I mean, over 20 people have been killed on the streets of Senegal. And although he said, that was all about his opponent, Ousmane Sonko, and his judicial case, it was clearly about Senegalese opinion, which opposed a third term for Macky Sall. And it's great that he's done the right thing after trying all the alternatives. But it's a real shame that he didn't come to this conclusion a lot earlier and then save the bloodshed and the political confusion that has happened this year.
Yeah, his main rival for the time being sidelined by a sexual assault conviction, Ousmane Sonko, warning in an interview with France 24 that, quote, there will be no elections in this country if Macky Sall uses judicial tricks to deny my candidacy.
In reality, President Macky Sall hasn't stood down because he's a Democrat. He abdicated because of pressure from his people, because his conspiracy against me failed, and because the Senegalese people stood up and said no. He's also given in the face of international pressure. There are also those formal complaints against him at the International Criminal Court and different UN organizations.
Leila Jacinto.
Well, when he says that Macky Sall was pressured to do it, he's probably right. I completely agree with Patrick Smith. I mean, this is really sad because, in a region that's very difficult, Macky Sall actually had not a bad record in terms of development, in terms of even fighting the jihadist threat. It's very sad that he sort of tried to follow the playbook on this. With Ousmane Sonko, we're up against an extremely populist candidate who is not very popular with the older Senegalese. They see him as a rabble-rouser, but he's very popular with younger Senegalese. He's filed lawsuits in France. So this is a very canny opponent. But there are some things that are just dismaying. When the internet is shut down, when an opposition candidate is seen as being harassed legally, it sends a very bad sign for a country that in the region has managed to have a democracy going for decades.
Patrick Smith, the Senegalese president, he's not the first one to leave power. There have been others, and there have been others who've been beaten at the ballot box. Senegal's democracy, is it an outlier?
No, not entirely. There are 3 military juntas in West Africa, but there are a bunch of governments that have changed leader under multi-party elections. I'm thinking of Nigeria, I'm thinking of Ghana, as well as Senegal. Just a note on the Macky Sall future question. I think it was interesting in Le Monde. The interviewer asked him about his political future on the international stage. Would he be prepared? Would he be interested in being the next Secretary General of the UN? And quite unmodestly, he said, "Yes, I'm going to think about that when the time comes."
The exact quote is, "I'd like to
until 2026."
He said, "I'd like to put myself at the service of Africa and the world."
Right, exactly. Yeah, which could include running for the Secretary Generalship of the UN. So maybe he made a tactical decision here. I don't know, and where that leads him, God knows. Yeah, got to wait and see.
Got to wait and see, indeed. After last week's riots across France, sparked by the police shooting of a 17-year-old trying to flee a traffic stop in a working-class suburb of Paris, the political establishment furiously taking exception with claims of institutionalized racism in the police and in the state. That's the context in which the president of the Paris region stripped a banlieue, a suburb, of the name Angela Davis on its high school, replacing it with another icon of the U.S. civil rights movement, Rosa Parks. It all started back in 2021, when Davis, who studied at the Sorbonne and when she was young, before going on to join the Black Panthers and the American Communist Party, had signed an open letter with other intellectuals denouncing a, quote, colonial mentality manifest in France's structures of governance, especially with regards to both citizens and immigrants of color. Conservative Valérie Pécresse, the president of the Paris region, pouncing on procedure. The communist-aligned city of Saint-Denis had not asked the region's permission before naming the high school in the first place. Pécresse quoting the now 79-year-old Davis.
The French state was showing evidence of systemic racism. I believe that in these conditions and context, people can continue expressing themselves in a very positive way on the French state. Considering the events that have taken place recently, I think there is a need to enforce the laws of the Republic.
Craig Capitas, renaming Angela Davis High School Rosa Parks High School in the northern suburbs of Paris. Your thoughts?
What more is this government of Macron going to do to throw?
Well, this is not Macron, and actually his education minister
Stop it
is
right
against
there.
it.
Stop it right there. No, it's not his government, because when it's domestic, it's the prime minister, isn't it? And we can get rid of it.
No. She's not from the same party, because
It doesn't matter. It's the imperium system here. There is racism in France, but you can't prove it because it's illegal to do the studies of data required to find out a solution, according to the French Constitution. France is indivisible, secular, democratic, and social republic without distinction of sex, origin, or religion. Therefore, everyone is French if you have a French passport. There is no difference between a black person, a white person, a yellow person. But that's just not the case. The French will not admit it. They've never admitted it. This is Groundhog Day again. And I'm sorry. Getting into the minutia, well, she was from this party, from this little banlieue, and she has nothing to do with Macron, and Macron sits up there.
she ran against him for president.
Bingo. I'll give you a bingo back.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter. The system here needs to be changed, and they won't change it because for some reason, far be it for me to figure it out, they will not admit that there is racism in this country. And because they will not admit it, or they can't admit it because there's no way to acquire the data to figure out a solution to the problem because that's illegal. Boy, that's about as Cartesian confusion as you can get.
Vivian Walt.
This is about more than data. It's not just about statistics. It's about the entire, thing in which France envelops itself, which is called Republican values.
Right.
And which we love, of course. The principles of, liberty, equality, and fraternity are wonderful. But I totally agree with Craig that there is a problem here. And the problem, it seems, has come to a breaking point, which is that you have a significant amount of people of color in this country who are simply feeling like they are not seen or heard or listened to. And one major problem is because the Republican values deems them not to be any different. The interesting thing about this, of course, is that the education minister is the only black member of this government.
We can quote him, Papendiaï. He disagrees with Valérie Pécresse. He's a respected academic on U.S. history and race, saying that a lot of names of schools and education facilities are drawn from a vast range of references that don't necessarily create a consensus. Again, naming a high school, high schools are the prerogative of the region, not the national state. But Vivian Walt, your thoughts on that? You're shaking your head.
This is kind of nonsense.
Yes.
Rosa Parks, Angela Davis, two iconic figures of the civil rights movement in the United States, both women.
And why do it?
And, the other thing that struck me is in the wake of the riots, the president invited to the Élysée all the mayors, and hundreds of them came, and they were all in the Élysée, and there really was not a black face among them. There were many from the Maghreb, from North Africa, that is for sure. But I looked hard, and I did not see one that was black French. And this is becoming an unsustainable issue in this country.
That's right. The first thing you got to do when you have to solve a problem is to admit you have a problem. And the French have never done that in this instance. They are stubborn about this republicanism that you speak of. And I don't see it changing.
And not just that, the defensiveness with which this is done.
Yes,
The UN Human Rights Office talks about systemic racism. This is anodyne. Every single rights group says that. And the foreign ministry comes out and says there is no systemic racism. At this stage, we're not talking about the president of this region or that region. This is French diplomacy sounding ridiculous. And so these are the incidents that will be picked up by the world watching. They're not going to be arguing about, well, the Minister of Higher Education did not agree with it. these kind of stories get traction, and France is seeming so out of touch. Why does this come about? Because, France race is a thorny issue. It comes from its experiences in the previous century, and it is completely out of touch with what's happening now.
Patrick Smith, multicultural Britain. How does it deal with its colonial past in relation to France?
Well, I'm not going to spring to the defense of Emmanuel Macron, still less Valérie Pécresse. But what I would say is that these issues are pan-European. All of the Western Europe has benefited enormously from, first of all, the transatlantic slave trade, on which it built its current day wealth half a millennium ago, and the subsequent colonial pillage of Africa and Asia. And I think that's what Europe has in common. And what it also has in common today is the collective discomfort of governments trying to come to terms with that legacy. And what is going on in France on the streets of Paris and Marseille and Lyon is exactly the same as what is going on in Britain on the streets of London and Birmingham and Manchester. So I think that there's a huge similarity. There's far more in common between what's happening in Britain and France, and the failure of successive governments to come to terms with colonialism and the legacy of racism that it's left to these societies.
Are you suggesting? Are you
Yep.
suggesting, Patrick, that then the universalism in which France shrouds itself isn't really the issue, that you'd have the same problem even if that didn't exist here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, to me, yeah. I mean, I think it's a bit of a side argument. I think what Europe needs to do, and maybe the European Union, which keeps on telling us about how important Africa is and how they want to have this terribly close relationship with Africa, economic ties, social and cultural ties, they need to get onto this issue and launch their own commission without fear or favor to look at the conditions of racism and discrimination right across Europe, and including its recent former member, Britain. And then, then people might believe outside Europe that Europe is finally getting serious about the legacy of colonialism and slavery. Until then, I think the rest of the world is just going to roll its eyes.
The Constitutional Council of the Republic forbids the processing of data necessary to find solutions. Patrick, my question is, in the United Kingdom, if you go out trying to collect data on race, sex, origin for these types of studies, would you be arrested for that in the UK? Or face arrest in the UK?
You do collect data, they do collect data, and Craig, the results are, as we know, the informal results that we've seen in France too, is that there is systemic and endemic racism in Britain, and that the police are institutionally racist in Britain, and as we all suspect, are institutionally racist in France. And the informal social science studies in France bear that out. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It'd be a lot better if you could go out and prove it emphatically with the data. But it's the reality that people are living that I think we need to address as well.
Yeah, the question is this now that it's calmed down and the riots for now are well and truly over, it's about more than just cleaning up the damage. It's also about seeking answers. France divided. There are more Justice for Naël rallies planned for this weekend. Others, though, are bemoaning last week's wanton looting by youth, as young as 11 in some cases, looting, which has led to more than 100 sentences to hard time in jail in fast-track judicial proceedings. Now, on the sidelines of a visit to the southwest of France Thursday, the French president spoke up with about these issues and what needs to happen.
We have all lived through an important moment in the life of the nation, so we will continue to work. First of all, the first response is order, calm, and harmony, and then it's to work on the root causes of what happened.
Order, calm, and harmony, and then work on the root causes.
What strikes me is why, and Patrick's, mentioned this, is sort of like for decades we've heard the same thing over and over again. What strikes me is why leaders like Macron have such a difficult time addressing those root causes or imagining that we actually might need to tear down some principles like colorblind.
Because he's backed by a sizable part of the population in France, which
true. Yes, that is true.
On this issue,
as was Jim Crow in the United States.
But I think
as was apartheid in South Africa.
I think that part of the reason why polls say that many support this is because the government has cast it as being an absolutely unnegotiable issue, and one in which if you dare negotiate it, somehow the whole republic is going to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
I always say that, the national education systems in UK and France should do a little less French Revolution and Magna Carta, a little more colonial and slavery economics. I mean, this is deeply rooted. Everybody who goes to the French education system comes out with these without really questioning the reality. So, it's basic. Of course, a lot of French people of my generation, if I bring this up, they say, oh, you're American. You people are identity crazy. There's racism in America. Whataboutism? Yes, of course there's racism in America. But these are extremely fundamental things that need to be questioned.
Yeah, and this is where it differs from the George Floyd protests we saw in the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, in the U.S. they were having discussions about, in some cities where the crime rate fell when there was no policing, because, there is so much violence brought on by the police. We haven't got anywhere near these kind of discussions at all. And we talk a lot. And a lot of these incidents keep repeating. And we hear the same thing without getting to the heart of the issue. It is astonishing.
It's not going to change. Again, it's the Groundhog Day moment. What Vivian said, why can't Macron get his arms around this? Why is it every time there's an internal domestic problem in France, the president's knee-jerk reaction is, let's fire the prime minister, we'll bring another one in, and the French people go along with it? I think what you said about education is really important, because that's where it starts in the education system here, having had two sons educated through the French education system.
But then you get, just getting back to the Angela Davis High School, it's this also part of this trend among politicians, which is to be anti-woke and to suggest that, this is just simply trying to make it more sectarian and woke.
Yeah, but it's a learning experience. Angela Davis was a controversial character in the United States. She's a professor now in the State of California University system, where she's still very controversial. And she's a wonderful person to study, to look at what she wrote, to what she represented. She was a heroine to many people. To others, she was a devil. Now, if you're in an educational system, let's talk about that. Let's not go in and say, I don't care who's doing it, we got to change the name of the high school. Well, come on. Then I'm going to scream, change the name of the high school, Henri Quatre. I thought he was an SOB too. It's reached a level of silliness, and Macron has turned into such a whoopsie over this stuff. It's just remarkable. He was elected on a platform, his own making, saying that he wanted to fundamentally change France. He has done nothing of the sort.
Vivian Walt.
Well, I mean, Craig raises an issue, which is that if, for example, they really did want to change the Angela Davis, lycée name.
And again, the government officially is against it.
Right. Okay.
But it's not their prerogative.
The Ile-de-France region wants to do that. They couldn't have found perhaps a black iconic figure in France after which to name it. So, I mean, that might have been a statement.
Alexander Dumas.
A statement in which to say, we are proud of our black leaders in this country. Let's name a high school after them. But they didn't. And that raises a whole lot of issues, which is, why are black figures in this country not recognized, venerated, taught,
Josephine
taught
Baker
to
was
children?
just consecrated at the Pantheon.
That's true, but she was originally not French. So, yes, that is true. Actually, I was thinking of her as well. They might have named her Josephine Baker.
Sure. They won't have that discussion here. That's the problem. French will not have this discussion, as you said. You bring it up. It's not true. We're not racist in France.
Bingo.
We'll leave it there for now. Consensus on this one from the panel. Craig Kapitas, many thanks. I want to thank Leila Jacinto, Vivian Walt, Patrick Smith in London. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.